In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. So we now have these PowerPoints that Sharif was kind enough to make. So we can follow along in the Bible study, like on the screen with the verses and the maps and everything are there. Does anybody remember where we left off last time?
Psalm 120?
Yes.
David left.
David left.
Jonathan told him to leave.
Okay. The situation. What is the situation? For those who were not here and those who aren't familiar with it.
Saul was trying to kill David.
Yeah, so what did you say?
Saul's trying to kill David.
Saul's trying to kill David, and so David does what?
He tests him.
He tests him by
There's a new moon feast or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like goes on 3 days. He tells Jonathan, they have this covenant with each other, and he tells Jonathan, why don't you ask your father if David is missing the first day or something like that, see if your father gets upset.
Mm-hmm.
And if he does, then maybe he means me hell or something like that.
Right, because if David's not there and Saul is upset, that's probably because he wanted the opportunity to kill him.
Right.
Good. And so then what happens?
And then David wasn't there the first day, but Saul said that maybe because he was unclean or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Right. So Saul didn't make a big deal out of it. He said maybe David is unclean, and so he can't attend the feast.
Right.
Okay. So then what happened?
The first day. That was the first.
First day.
Second day. What happened? So the second day, Saul asked about David, where David was, and then Jonathan answered and said that he went and he celebrated the feast with his family.
Good.
But that wasn't the case, obviously, and then Saul got upset.
Yeah.
And that's what happened.
So Saul got upset.
That's how Jonathan knew that he meant ill towards David.
He meant ill to David, and he wanted to kill him. Okay. And so David went and Jonathan went to tell David. Okay, and he signaled to him, essentially telling him, Saul, my father wants to kill you, so you have to go. And it was a big, dramatic, goodbye, because Jonathan and David were best friends, and now they are having to be separated. Okay, good, very good. So we're at the point now where the last thing we read at the end of chapter 20 was that David leaves. Okay, David leaves. He leaves the palace. He leaves the life, and now he's like a fugitive because the king wants him dead, and he can't just go and go back to his family because people are going to know that he's there, and Saul's going to send somebody to kill him. No matter where he goes, Saul is wanting to kill him. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. That David is now on the run for his life. He has to remain secret. He has to always be watchful, of what's happening to him. And this was one of the most stressful time in David's life. And like we were saying last time, from the moment where God anointed David to be the king until now, it's like there have been many things that have changed. King David was anointed. King David was chosen to be the musician who comes and plays for Saul when he's distressed. And then he went and defeated Goliath, and then he became famous, and now he's running for his life. And all of these changes that have happened are still within the context that God has anointed David to be the king. Okay, so we see that from the time that God gives us a promise and he tells us that something is going to happen until the time that it actually does happen, there might be lots of ups and downs. And King David remained faithful throughout everything that he did. And he didn't at this point say, okay, God, well, where are you? Why did you leave me? Or begin to doubt that God wasn't really with him, or that whatever God had told him would happen would no longer happen. We never see any of that kind of doubt in King David, but King David was very patient. And he was accepting even this. And even so, he was respectful of Saul. He never tried to kill Saul. And even when he had opportunities to kill him, he never killed him. He never cursed him. He never mistreated him, even though he knew that God rejected him to be king. Okay, and he knew that he was to be in his place. So again, if we put ourselves in his situation, even with something much more minor, like maybe we don't like our boss, and we know that our boss's boss is going to fire him, and we know that we are going to take his place. And here we are dealing with our boss, and yet how are we going to deal with him? Are we going to deal with him like someone who's been rejected? Are we dealing with him like with someone where you don't deserve to be where you are, and so I'm not going to listen to what you say? Actually, King David was very respectful to Saul all throughout this, and continues to be. And even though he's running for his life, he never takes arms against Saul. Even though we'll see later on, he begins to develop kind of like a following, like a militia of people that are loyal to David and are following him, and they call him, David's mighty men. But he never tries to use this band of mighty men to go and infiltrate the palace. He never tries to use them to go kill Saul. He has no revenge on his mind. All he's thinking of is, okay, well, I have to escape because I can't stay in the palace. But he doesn't hate Saul. He's not attacking Saul. And that's a very important thing we learn here from David, that we should also emulate in our own life, because many times when we're faced with similar situations, we do seek revenge and we do have hate in our heart for those people, especially when we know that they're doing wrong. So we'll start reading in chapter 21. Now David came to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. And Ahimelech was afraid when he met David, and said to him, "Why are you alone and no one is with you?" So we have a map here, which we will be referring to several times, actually, as we see David running from place to place. So David began here in Gibeah, where Saul was, and then here we see him going over to Nob. This is the city here. He's going over to Nob over here. Later on, he's going to go to Gath. Gath is actually in the land of the Philistines. Okay. And then we'll see him actually going all the way over here to the Moabites. And then he'll come back again, and he'll go to this cave called Adullam. So he's running around everywhere. We see him going constantly from place to place. So we're gonna read about these places here. So David goes to Nob, and Nob here was, so if you remember, there are certain cities that are called Levitical cities. Do you remember what the Levitical cities are? Or what is a Levitical city? What is Levitical? Comes from Leviticus, and Leviticus is named after who? Levi. Okay, and what was special about the Levites?
That's a tribe of Moses and Aaron.
Yes.
Because it's the tribe of Moses and Aaron, or Aaron specifically, the priest. So that's the tribe of the priests. Right.
So this is the tribe of the priests. Okay, and not just so. Aaron is a Levite. Okay, and so all the priests are descendants of Aaron. So anyone who's a descendant of Aaron, you're automatically going to be a priest. Like that's just it for you. You're going to be a priest. All the other descendants of Levi that were not specifically of Aaron were also to serve in the temple and the tabernacle in some way. Like, for instance, there could be artisans that make the items of the tabernacle, or there'd be people who take care of the temple, or people who carry the tabernacle from place to place. Anything related to the service of the tabernacle and the temple, the service of God, was for the tribe of the Levites in one way or the other. So there were certain cities called Levitical cities. Again, like we mentioned before, if you look here in this 12 tribes of Israel, you notice that here this map shows you all the land inheritance that God gave to the different tribes. Okay, and there was no land inheritance given for the Levites, because as the priestly class, as the priestly tribe, the priests needed to be scattered all throughout the land. Because if you needed a priest to offer a burnt sacrifice and all these things, like, you couldn't just go to have to travel to one area in the country and say, okay, well, I'm going to go there. The priest had to be everywhere. So the different tribes gave different cities for the Levites to dwell among them, even though they were not of that tribe. Okay, so this city here, Nob, is not one of those cities, but there was many Levites living there. Okay, so Ahimelech, who is a priest, that means that he is what? A Levite, and more specifically, a descendant of Aaron. Okay, so you know that off the bat when you know that someone is a priest. Okay, so Ahimelech saw David, and he was afraid, and he said, "Why are you alone and no one is with you?" You know, it's kind of like David is this very important person. You don't expect him to be going around by himself. Okay, it's kind of like seeing Donald Trump just show up like with no Secret Service. Okay, you don't expect that to happen. Well, you don't expect him to come anyway. Okay, so he would not be expecting David to come here at this point. Okay, so he was concerned. Okay, it says, why is nobody with you? So David said to Ahimelech the priest, "The king has ordered me on some business and said to me, 'Do not let anyone know anything about the business on which I send you or what I have commanded you, and I have directed my young men to such and such a place.'" Okay, so King David is giving an answer. It's not actually the truth. He's saying essentially, I'm on like a secret mission. Okay, and that's why I'm here by myself, because nobody knows about it, and I don't want to draw attention to myself. And the other people that, my people who are with me, I sent them somewhere else, and now I'm here like in the service of King Saul. So in Ahimelech's mind, keep in mind that this is legitimate. He knows who David is. He knows that David is a trustworthy person. He knows that David is a servant of Saul. And so whatever David is about to tell him, Ahimelech believes it, and takes it at face value. Okay? "Now therefore, what have you on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in my hand, or whatever can be found." Okay. Keep in mind, again, try to put yourself in the context of this is thousands of years ago. There's no grocery stores. There's no way for people to just travel. Like we take for granted, I could today travel from here and go to Austin. Even if I had no supplies with me, I'm going to find a way to eat and to drink and to sleep. And there's supplies everywhere. Okay. Back then, you couldn't just do that. So David, he left his place without any preparation. He didn't have supplies. He didn't have anything. Okay. So the first thing on his mind is, I need to eat. Okay. So where does he go? He goes to somewhere where he thinks is relatively safe. Okay. This is the priests. Okay. And they know him. And here they are. He's telling them he's on the secret mission. So give me something to eat. Okay. He said 5 loaves of bread in my hand, or whatever, okay, can be found. Also, it was not uncommon at that time that whenever people would travel, they would go and ask for supplies and food and water from people along the travel route. And it wasn't uncommon for the people to give them, because they knew that it was very difficult for people to travel at that time. So it was kind of like just kind of a common courtesy that whenever there are people who are traveling and they come and ask you for food, that you would give it to them. Because you also, when you travel, you need the help of other people to survive.
Like your father Abraham.
Yes.
He said with the 3 visitors.
Exactly. "And the priest answered David and said, 'There is no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread, if the young men have at least kept themselves from women.'" What does that mean? What is common bread and holy bread?
The holy bread is the bread on the in the tabernacle, like in the table of showbread.
Yes.
It was only for the priest, so it's not common.
Good. So common bread is regular bread, okay, which is what David was asking for. He said, "Just give me regular bread. I only want regular bread." So what is Ahimelech's response? He's saying, "We don't have any regular bread. The only bread that we have available is the holy bread, which is the showbread." Okay? So what is this showbread? So in the tabernacle, there was something called the table of showbread. And the word show, essentially, it's not show like the way we think of the word show. The way you can really understand the showbread, it's like the bread of the presence of God. Okay? This is bread that it was 12 loaves of bread. 1 loaf for each tribe of Israel. And it was stacked in 2 stacks of 6. So imagine you had a table like this, and you had 6 stacks of bread and 6 stacks of bread. Okay? Each one represents one of the tribes of Israel. And why was this? It represents that the 12 tribes of Israel are in the presence of the Lord all the time, because the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy of Holies and the tabernacle as itself is like the house of God. So the 12 tribes of Israel are in the house of God. And this bread would be there. And the bread would be replaced every week. Okay? Every week. The new bread would be put in its place. And the old bread, the priests were allowed to eat from it. Okay? This is actually commanded in Leviticus chapter 24, verse 9. It says, "And it shall be for Aaron and his sons, and they shall eat it in a holy place, for it is most holy to him, from the offerings of the Lord made by fire by a perpetual statute." Okay? So this was like a symbol of peace. Like a symbol of peace between the people and God. Because it's kind of like a meal. Like when you have a meal with someone, you only have a meal with people that you're in peace with. Okay, so it's like we are in peace with God because we are having like a meal with him. Like the bread is in the presence of God and the priests are eating from the bread. It's kind of like the way that the peace offering was done. In the peace offering, everyone ate a part of the offering. Okay, but again, the commandment is that it shall be for Aaron and his sons. Okay, and we said what? That's the priests. Aaron and his sons are the priests. Okay, so what is Ahimelech saying?
That there's still a condition to be able to eat from that bread, from the holy bread.
Right. So first of all, he's saying, okay, you can have from it, but only if what? If the men have not been with women. Okay. So there is in the Old Testament certain laws of purification. Okay, and these purification laws is what determined if you were clean or unclean. Okay, so there were certain requirements in order to be partaking of something that was holy. And in this case, because this is holy bread, okay, the priests, they had to be ritually clean for them to partake of it. And one of the rules of being ritually clean is they had to abstain from sexual activity. Okay, so here he's saying, he's making a concession. He's saying, you, even though you're not priests, I'm allowing you to eat of this bread, but you have to be ritually clean, just like the priests who eat from it also have to be ritually clean. Does that make sense? Okay.
Does that mean permanently or just for a time?
Just for a time. You have to be ritually clean for a time, and then you could participate in something like offer a burnt sacrifice, or do something related to like the religious rites of Israel. You had to be ritually clean.
So like our fasting before communion.
Except that's different. So we don't have the concept in the New Testament of clean and unclean. It's not like if we're not fasting, we're unclean. Okay? It's an economy that's put in place to help us take communion seriously. So we do it as like a self-discipline to always keep us kind of understanding the honor of the sacrament and remembering the honor of the sacrament, preparing ourselves to take of the sacrament. But that doesn't mean that we're unclean. Right? Like for instance, in the Old Testament, if you touched a dead animal, you were unclean. Like there were things that's like unrelated to moral issues. Like that was considered also part of being clean and unclean. Okay. So Christ himself actually referred to this event when he was speaking to the Pharisees. Do you remember what the situation? Why was Christ bringing this up?
He was talking about when they found the disciples plucking the heads of the grain.
Yes.
They're asking why don't they fast? And then Jesus responded to them. There's like the bridegroom, or who was it? Like, do the people like fast when the bridegroom is there? Something like that. Isn't that it, or is that a different scenario?
It was related to the Sabbath. No, it was because they were doing that on the Sabbath.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
So they were plucking the grains and eating it. And again, why were the apostles doing that? Because of food. Like it was lawful, okay, according to the Old Testament laws, that if you are traveling through someone else's property and you were hungry, because again you're a traveler, and you wanted to partake of some of the harvest of the land, even though it doesn't belong to you, that it was lawful. Like God said, this is lawful to do. Because you're not like harvesting and taking it with you to sell it. You're just taking of your own for your own needs to eat. Okay? So the apostles were doing that. Okay? But the problem that the Pharisees had is that they were doing it on the Sabbath. So when Christ mentioned this, okay, what was the point he was trying to make? Why is this relevant to that situation in the New Testament?
Because that's the law. Like it's about you get righteousness from the law in the old way. But Christ is saying you can't get righteousness from the law. Like no one can be saved through the law. Like he's trying to show them that like the Sabbath, like by keeping these rules are not going to save you. You know?
Right, but specifically about the Sabbath. So I mean, for instance, the Pharisees were arguing that on the Sabbath you can't do any work. Okay? And they considered that plucking the heads of the grain and eating it was like work. You shouldn't be doing that. Okay? So the what Christ was trying to say is that, like when he says the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath, when he said these laws are intended to help us. They're not intended to harm us. And if there's like an exceptional situation where someone who of no fault of their own is going to die because they can't eat, God is not going to just say, no, you can't eat of the showbread and you're just going to die, right? So the idea is that the rules, and I'm talking about moral rules, I'm talking about like the ritualistic things that we do are intended to help us. They're not intended to hinder us, which is why there are exceptional cases for everything. Like, for instance, the fasting rules in the church. Many people have been given absolution by the father of confession not to fast those things. Okay, they fast maybe a much simpler, like a much lower number of days, because that's what they're able to do. Because the idea is if we place the full burden of fasting on someone who has never fasted before, then it's just too much. I can't handle it. But if you give somebody a small amount of fasting and you say, okay, I can fast 1 day a week or whatever, then it's something manageable. It's something that makes them feel like, okay, I can do this, until they get used to it. Then you add another day, then you add another day, and so on, until maybe eventually someone can end up being able to fast all the fasts of the church, but they couldn't have done it if they tried to do it from the first day. Okay, so that's an exceptional case, even though we have certain rules. For instance, like another exceptional case, we're supposed to be fasting before we take communion. Okay, but what if somebody has diabetes and they have to eat at certain times? Do we tell that person no, because you have to eat at certain times, you're not allowed to take communion? No. Okay, if we did that, again, it would be like we're worshiping the Sabbath. Okay, the idea of the Sabbath is supposed to be a helper to us. It's not supposed to be a hindrance to us. Okay, so if there's an exceptional case where someone would be harmed by trying to follow those rules, we're not going to tell somebody, risk your life by fasting just so you can take communion. That's not what God intended. Because it's not a question of right and wrong. It's a question of what is helpful to us. When we fast before communion, it helps us. It makes us understand the sacrament. It makes us take it seriously. It makes us, be focused. Okay, but for other people, that doesn't like, something else trumps that, which is the fact that their health can't handle fasting. Okay, so there's different, that's what we also have to keep in mind. Like, when it comes to these things, is these are intended to help us. And if here King David was going to die, the priest, who is the one in authority, who is the one who is in command of the tabernacle, he's the one who decided. It wasn't that King David decided. And this is the other flip side. Sometimes when it comes to these exceptional cases, the people will come and say, you know what, this is unfair, or why do we have to follow these rules, or why do we do this? I'm just going to go do it. I'm just going to go take it. But that's not what King David did. King David went and he asked the priest, and he asked him, give me some bread. And the priest, in his wisdom, said, well, we don't have any common bread, but we have this holy bread, and here are the requirements if you want to have it. He made a concession for him, right? So it's the church that makes the concession to us. It's not that we tell the church what she has to do. And that's a different attitude to have. We're coming with a spirit of humility, and we're saying, this is what we need, but then we wait for it to be granted to us, or not. Maybe sometimes it will not be granted. Maybe the church feels like this is not appropriate, or no, you have another solution, another, sometimes somebody comes and asks for maybe financial assistance from the church. Okay, and many times the church gives financial assistance to those in need. But sometimes the church might look at the lifestyle of a certain person and say, you know what, you really don't need financial assistance. You've been using your money but spending it in an unwise way, and that's why you don't have any money. Go change the way you spend your money, and then you're not going to have a problem, right? So the church denied it, said, no, we're not going to do that. Okay, so that's an important principle to keep in mind. Okay. So here again, Ahimelech is telling David, you can eat of this showbread, but you have to have abstain from sexual activity. Then David answered the priest and said to him, truly women have been kept from us about 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in effect common, even though it was consecrated in the vessel this day. So the first part of it is clear, where he says, truly women have been kept from us from about the 3 days since I came out. So he's saying essentially from the time that I left Saul, we haven't had any sexual activity. That's understandable. Okay. The second part of the verse there's debate about what it means. Okay, we'll read it again. And the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in effect common, even though it was consecrated in the vessel this day. Different versions of the Bible translate this differently, in a way that makes it make more sense and means one way or the other. In the New King James Version, this is what it says. Okay, but if you read the New International Version, okay, what it says is, David replied, indeed women have been kept from us as usual whenever I set out, The men's bodies are holy, even on missions that are not holy. How much more so today? So essentially, according to this translation, the New International Version, David is responding to the priest and saying, yes, we have not had any sexual activity, and we never have sexual activity when we're getting ready to go on a mission. Okay, so he's saying, of course we're holy because we're on a mission, right? Because King David told Ahimelech that they're on a mission. So Ahimelech responded and said, you can have the bread as long as you haven't had any sexual activity. And King David is saying, of course we didn't have sexual activity because we're on a mission, and when we're on a mission, we don't do that. Okay, so that's what this translation means. The way this is translated here, there's a lot of debate on what it actually means. And some people say when it says, and the vessels of the young men are holy, means like the bodies of the young men are holy. Essentially saying, like my vessel is my body, is holy. Okay, but the wording of it is confusing. So I couldn't find a lot more written about it to kind of explain it in different ways, but I felt like the way it's translated, the New International Version, makes sense, because that's essentially what King David is saying. Yes, we are pure. Okay, we have not had any sexual activity.
What does it mean that the bread is in effect common if it was the showbread?
But that's what makes it confusing, because it makes it seem like he's saying, the way I understood it, which again is just my understanding, is that he's saying the bread is common because you're allowing us to eat it because we need it to survive. So we're not treating it like holy bread. We're not eating it as the priests eat it as holy bread, but we're eating it like as common bread. But again, like these same words can be translated in different ways. So I'm not sure if this is even the intention of the translation. So the priest gave him holy bread, for there was no bread there but the showbread, which had been taken from the Lord, taken from before the Lord, in order to put hot bread in its place on the day when it was taken away. Again, remember, the bread is replaced on every Sabbath. Okay, on every Sabbath, the old showbread that's been there for 1 week is removed, and new showbread is put, and then it can be consumed. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg an Edomite, the chief of the herdsmen who belonged to Saul. And David said to Ahimelech, is there not here on hand a spear or a sword? For I have brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste. So he's saying the king's business was so important that I had to leave even before taking any weapons with me. And he's asking Ahimelech if there's any weapons there that he could use. So the priest said, the sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, there it is, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you will take that, take it. For there is no other except that one here. And David said, there is none like it, give it to me. Which is very interesting that David knew that this location he probably knew that it had this sword. Okay, this is the sword that he used to kill Goliath with, to chop his head off with it. Okay, and this is the same sword that now David himself is going to use. Okay. Then David arose and fled that day from before Saul and went to Achish, the king of Gath. Okay, so David is fleeing the kingdom. Okay, he's fleeing the whole kingdom. So just to show you here where we are, we started out here in Gibeah. We went to Nob, which is where Ahimelech is, and then he travels all the way over here to get to Gath. Okay, which is one of the cities of the Philistines. Okay, so this is the enemies. These are the enemies of Israel. He's fleeing here to the enemies of Israel.
Isn't that the city of Goliath? Goliath of Gath was he?
I don't remember if he was from Gath, but Gath is. We've talked about Gath here in 1 Samuel before. It was when they were having the battles for the Ark of the Covenant, and the Philistines stole the Ark of the Covenant. I think Gath is one of the places where the Ark of the Covenant was.
So,
Yeah, it is. Goliath from Gath.
From Gath, okay.
so you're saying that they found, or so what they're saying is that they found the sword there in the valley?
No, they were keeping the sword. Ahimelech was keeping the sword there,
Oh,
wrapped up like as a, as a
Okay.
relic of the war.
gotcha.
Okay, so King David asked him, "Is there any swords I can use?" And he said, "There's this sword, which is Goliath's sword."
Okay.
And the servants of Achish said to him, "Is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing of him to one another in dances, saying, 'Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s?'" So here, the people in Gath, they they heard of this song that originally had made Saul so jealous of David when they were returning from the battle, and after David had slain Goliath and slain all these Philistines, that the women were singing, "Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s." Okay, so the people here in Gath interpreted, because they had heard this song, that this made David more elevated than Saul, and so that he was the king. Even though David is not the king, nobody will point to David in Israel and say, "You are the king." Okay, everyone acknowledges Saul to be the king, but here they are interpreting David to be the king of the land. Okay, the land of Israel. So David is wanting to go here again, being covert. Doesn't want people to see him, to know him. Like, he's just trying to get away from Saul and from Israel, like, to figure out what he's going to do. But the moment that he arrives, people recognize him because he's like a celebrity. Okay, now David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath, because he now knows that he knows who he is. So he changed his behavior before them, pretended madness in their hands, scratched on the doors of the gate, and let his saliva fall down on his beard. So essentially, he's pretending to be mad, right? So he's coming and hoping to be secret, and then they found out about him. And because they know who he is, they know he's an important person, he's going to be a target, so that they would kill him because he's their enemy. So he decides to pretend to be insane, hoping that they would have mercy on him because he's not going to be any threat, because he's just this insane man. Okay, and it works. Then Achish said to his servants, "Look, you see, the man is insane. Have you brought him to me? Have I need of madmen, that you have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house?" Okay, so the whole plan of King David going to Gath kind of fizzled out. He didn't get what he wanted. He went there for a time, hoping that he could kind of stay there in secret, but all of this happened, and so now he has to figure out where to go. Any questions about this chapter 21?
So how did they figure out that was David? So they might have heard the song, but how did they figure out that guy was David? It could have just been some Jew running away with a band of
I mean, he was very much in the public eye because he killed Goliath, who is a Philistine, who was their greatest warrior, right? So they had it in for him. He is the single reason why the Philistines lost against the Israelites. Okay, so
He's public enemy number one.
yeah, exactly.
And Facebook.
Yeah.
Of course.
Okay. So chapter 22. Okay. David therefore departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. So when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. And everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone, that's the next verse. Here, let me show you this first. So remember, we said Gath was here, right? Then he goes over to Adullam. Okay, and there's a cave here in Adullam that he hid inside of it. Okay, here. So when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down to him there. So his family found out that he was there, and they went and saw him. And everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him. So he became captain over them, and there were about 400 men with him. So he started to have like a following among those people who wanted the regime change. Those people who were unhappy with Saul, those people who were upset, those people who felt King David could be like their advocate, could be someone who, fights for their rights, gives them what they need, people who felt neglected, that if they support David and David comes into power, then they would, like there would be something good that happened to them. Like they were not Saul They were not Saul supporters. Okay, so this group of people trusted in David, and they recognized who he was, and they wanted to follow him. And so he had about 400 people following him. This is now when he starts to build up his own militia that eventually becomes like his closest advisors, his closest soldiers, his closest people when he becomes king. Okay. Then David went from there to Mizpah of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, "Please let my father and mother come here with you till I know what God will do for me." So he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. So, like I said here, okay, he went here from this cave, Adullam. He went all the way down to Moab, which is here on the other side of the Red Sea. Okay, the Dead Sea. So very far away, and then this is going very far away from Israel. Okay, he's really wanting to not stay in Israel. So he went to the king of Moab, and he's asking him what? He's saying, "I'm going to be dwelling here. Please allow my family also to be here and protect them." Okay. So he says he brought them before the king, and they dwelt with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. So he had like a stronghold there in Moab, kind of like a place where he would stay, and these 400 people who were with him, kind of like a little fort, where they would stay together. And his parents were allowed to stay there as well.
Did they not fight the Moabites at one point?
They did. They did many times. So again, this was another enemy of Israel. But what I was reading is maybe one of the reasons that Moab, that the Moabites kind of like dealt with David favorably is because his great grandmother was Ruth,
And she's from Moab.
and she's a Moabite. So maybe like they felt like they were going to treat him well, and that he wasn't really any threat to them.
They would have remembered that?
Hmm?
They would have remembered that?
I don't know. They didn't have like family trees and stuff to figure out. Maybe. Genealogy was a big deal back then, like it was like who you are is who your parents were, so he was there in Moab. Now the prophet Gad said to David, "Do not stay in the stronghold, depart and go to the land of Judah." So David departed and went into the forest of Hareth. It was actually unlawful for David to make a treaty with the Moabites, because the Moabites were the enemies of Israel, and they were not even allowed to associate with them, to talk with them, to be with them. So here the prophet is telling David, "Leave, don't stay here," because King David, like you can imagine, like he doesn't know where to go, he doesn't know what to do. All he knows is, "I can't stay in Israel, because as long as I'm in Israel, Saul was going to find me." And especially now that he has this entourage of people following him, he's not like going to really be covert. He can't really hide. It's like this huge number of people. And wherever he goes, the word is going to get back to Saul, and then Saul is going to come to kill him. So he's trying to go everywhere else that's not Israel. He says, okay, if I'm in Gath and the Philistines, no one is going to touch me. If I'm in the Moab, like the two bordering nations of Israel, he's trying to go because he doesn't know what to do. And so, like now, the prophet who is again speaking on the mouth of God, he's telling him, "No, go back to Judah." So this means that God has now a plan. He's going to figure out like what's going to happen. God has a plan because he's telling him go back to Judah. So David believed. David didn't argue with this. He didn't say, "No, how am I going to go back to Judah and Saul is going to kill me?" And we just made up this nice deal with the Moabites, and now we can stay here, and this is a much better deal than what we had over there. Like, he did not try to argue at all. He just said, okay, God is telling me to go back to Judah, which is like the most dangerous place for me. I'm going to go back to Judah. Okay? And then we'll see what God is going to do there. This is actually the first time we hear about this prophet, Gad the prophet.
I was going to ask. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we hear about him maybe one more time. But yeah, this is the first time we hear about him. We don't know much about him. When Saul heard that David and the men who were with him had been discovered, now Saul was staying in Gibeah near a tamarisk tree in Ramah, with his spear in his hand, and all his servants standing about him. Okay, so remember, Gibeah is back where we started this. Okay, here, where all of this started. Gibeah is the city of Saul. Okay? This is originally where Saul was from. This is kind of like you can consider it kind of like the capital at the time. Keep in mind that at this time, Jerusalem is not even controlled by Israelites. Whenever we hear Jerusalem, like we think, oh yeah, that's the capital of Israel. At this point, they didn't even control Israel. Jerusalem. There was a people called the Jebusites. The Jebusites were living in that city, and it was called Jebus after the Jebusites. So the Jebusites were called Jebusites because they lived in Jebus. Okay, so it wasn't called Jerusalem, but that was very close here. If you see it, it's right here. But Saul now is in Gibeah, and he heard that now David is back in town. Then Saul said to his servants who stood about him, "Hear now, you Benjamites, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make all you captains of thousands and captains of hundreds?" What is Saul saying?
What power, what wealth does David have compared to me?
Right, and?
Like, I can give you these things, he can't.
Right, so he's starting to feel what? Threatened. He feels insecure. He's like, maybe all these people that are around me, they're secretly going to leave me and go to David. Right? He doesn't want that to happen. So he's essentially saying, David can't give you anything. Look, I can give you all these things, and what is David going to be able to give you? And he's now starting to question, is like, who helped David? How is it that David was like this fugitive on the run, and now how he is now like having this entourage of people, and like he's thinking to himself, someone is helping David. Okay, someone is helping David. All of you have conspired against me, and there is no one who reveals to me that my son has made a covenant with the son of Jesse. And there is not one of you who is sorry for me, or reveals to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait as it is this day. Okay, so first of all, Saul is very paranoid at this point. He thinks that everyone has conspired against him, okay? And he thinks that, like Jonathan, his son, has made this pact with David, and somehow Jonathan is helping him to build up this group of people and everything. And he's saying, there's not one of you who is sorry for me. Like, Saul thinks that people should be sorry for him. Like, why should people be sorry for you? Like, what exactly, like, how are you a victim in all of this? Okay? And again, he's thinking Jonathan is behind all of this. Now, Doeg the Edomite, when did we hear about him before? We read about him earlier. Where was he?
The temple.
In the Levitical city.
In the city. No, right? With Ahimelech. So remember, Doeg the Edomite, it said Doeg the Edomite was there, and he was one of the servants of Saul. Okay, so now Doeg the Edomite happens to be here. He's saying, then answered Doeg the Edomite, who was set over the servants of Saul, and said, I saw the son of Jesse go to Nob to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. So now he's speaking up. Okay, actually, Doeg knew of this all along. He didn't say anything. Okay, he just kind of kept quiet. Okay, at that point, maybe, I don't know, he didn't feel like it was important, or he didn't want to get in trouble, or whatever the reason. But now suddenly he feels like, oh yeah, you know what? I saw David, and I know who helped him. Okay, and he's saying it was Ahimelech when he went and gave him food and all this stuff. And he inquired of the Lord for him, gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Okay, now he's really implicating him very much. Not just because, he gave him provisions and he gave him the sword, but specifically as a priest because he inquired of the Lord. Right? Again, remember how we said that the priest inquired of the Lord? Okay, God speaks to them in different ways, and one way is using you remember the two things we said?
The ephod?
The ephod, yeah, those two, what are they? What are they called?
The two things.
The Urim and the Thummim. Okay?
Yeah,
so when God, like when people would want to ask a God like a yes or no question, okay, that God would respond using these things that are on the ephod of the priest. They were like on their two shoulders, the Urim and the Thummim. Okay, so essentially like one would mean yes and one would mean no. So, when somebody would ask, should we go out and fight our enemies? And then God would respond yes or no. Okay, that's one of the ways that people were able to communicate with God, and God would respond back to them. And this is one of the reasons they would go to the priests. Okay, because the priests would inquire of the Lord, God would respond to them. So here, the fact that the fact that he's inquiring of the Lord is a much greater thing than simply giving him provisions. Anyone could give him provisions. David could figure out a way to find food. He could figure out a way to get what he needs. But to inquire of the Lord was something very specific that only the priest could do. So now, Saul is going to be extremely angry at this priest, saying it's like, well, if you are loyal to me, then how are you helping my enemy? Okay. But remember, Ahimelech, King David told him, well, I'm on a secret mission from Saul, and everything he's doing is from Saul. So Ahimelech had no reason to think that King David was against Saul at that point. Okay, we're going to see what's going to happen now. So the king sent to call Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, the priests who were in Nob, and they all came to the king. Okay, now you start to see like this is the first danger sign. He didn't just call for Ahimelech, he called for his entire family. Okay, so all the entire family of Ahimelech is now coming, okay, to see the king. And Saul said, "Hear now, son of Ahitub." And he answered, "Here I am, my lord." Then Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me that you and the son of Jesse, in that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of God for him, that he should rise against me to lie in wait as it is this day?" So again, Saul is thinking from the perspective that King David is plotting to kill me. He's plotting to kill me. And now everyone who's helping him is helping him to kill Saul. That's not what David is doing. So Ahimelech answered the king and said, okay, and now listen to the several things here, like 5 main points that Ahimelech is defending David with. Okay, so first he says, "Who among all your servants is as faithful as David?" Okay, so the first thing he refers to David as his servant. Okay, David is a servant of Saul. David is not like a rogue agent far away from him. And he's saying, who is as faithful? Nobody in Saul's house is as faithful to Saul as David is. How is it that David could be plotting to kill the king? And also, who is the king's son-in-law? David is married to Saul's daughter. Okay, so he's related to Saul. Okay, who goes at your bidding, meaning wherever you tell him to go, he goes. When King Saul was trying to kill David and telling him go and kill 100 Philistines, King David went and he killed 200 Philistines. Right, wherever he was sent to go, he would go, and is honorable in your house. Okay, who among all your servants is as faithful as David, who is the king's son-in-law, who goes at your bidding and is honorable in your house? All these things, Ahimelech is trying to tell Saul essentially, like, you're crazy. Like, how is it that King David is against you? Did I then begin to inquire of God for him? Far be it from me. Let not the king impute anything to his servant, or to any in the house of my father. For your servant knew nothing of all of this, little or much. Meaning, I had no idea that this was happening. King David, I didn't know that King David was on the run. I didn't know that he was running from you. He said that you were sending him on a mission and all of this. So don't blame me, for what's happening. But of course, that kind of logic is not going to work with Saul. And the king said, "You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house." So he's now going to kill Ahimelech. He's going to kill his entire family. Then the king said to the guards who stood about him, "Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew when he fled and did not tell it to me. But the servants of the king would not lift up their hands to strike the priests of the Lord." What is this saying here?
The people feared God.
The people feared God more than Saul. Saul has lost his mind at this point. Like he has no sense. He thinks that people need to be sorry for him. He thinks everyone's conspiring against him. He thinks he is the victim, even though he's the one trying to kill David. He's completely lost all sense. He wants to kill an entire family of priests for doing nothing. Okay? So the people, on the other hand, who are with him, even the guards, okay, and the guards are not like high officials in the kingdom. They're just guards. They refuse to do what he said because it's insane. Doesn't make any sense. And they're afraid because these are the priests of God, and they are going to be held accountable if they kill the priests of God. Okay. So what does Saul do? And the king said to Doeg, "You turn and kill the priests." So Doeg the Edomite turned and struck the priests and killed on that day 85 men who wore a linen ephod. Why did Doeg the Edomite do it?
Because if not, he would have been killed.
But all the other guards could also have been killed by Saul. How
He's
come?
the one that said that the priest, inquired of God and gave him food.
Yeah, he was the one who accused him. But why else? Why specifically him?
He's an Edomite, not an Israelite.
Right.
He doesn't understand.
He's an Edomite. Okay? Who are the Edomites?
I think it's his descendant, one of the daughters of Lot.
Mm-mm. It's the descendant of Esau. Okay? Esau. So all the descendants of Esau, the brother of Jacob, okay, are called Edomites. And they lived in the land of Edom. Now remember, Esau and Jacob were enemies. Okay? Because Esau wanted to kill Jacob because he stole his birthright. Okay, and his inheritance. So from that day on, Esau and Jacob, they were enemies, and the entire peoples were enemies. So the Edomites were enemies of the Israelites. Okay, and yet God did not destroy the Edomites. He gave them an inheritance too. He gave them something. So Doeg the Edomite, they do not have the same understanding of the priests and worshiping God and the temple and the tabernacle. They didn't have any of that. So this man Doeg is a foreigner. Okay, and he's there telling the king, oh yeah, I saw David do this and this. He didn't have a lot of stake in this. Now maybe he just wanted to get promoted. Maybe he just wanted to have reward from Saul because, I'm going to go tell Saul what he wants. I'm going to do Saul's bidding and Saul's going to give me what I want. He didn't have any fear of God. He didn't have any fear of what was going to happen. All he wanted to do was please his boss, okay, who was going to give him some kind of a reward. So he went and he killed these 85 priests. Also Nob, the city of the priests, he struck with the edge of the sword both men and women, children and nursing infants, oxen and donkeys and sheep with the edge of the sword. Okay. He went to the city where Ahimelech was, and he essentially killed everyone in the city. Okay, all of the priests and everyone who was there. Okay, he took upon himself the authority that only God has. If you remember, whenever God would be sending people, the Israelites, to different lands to take over, for instance, in the land of Canaan, the promised land, he would tell them to execute justice on these certain peoples who were there, who were sinners, sinning against God, who God wanting to execute justice on them. So he would tell them, go destroy these people, and go destroy these people. All the people, the men, the women, the children, the oxen, everything. God is the one who would say this. And now here, King Saul, who is the first king of Israel, he is now trying to take upon himself the same authority that God only had, which was essentially to wipe out and execute an entire group of people, even innocent people, for his own selfish reasons. Not for God's reasons, not for reasons that that only God knows, but for only his own selfish reasons. And he went and he destroyed this. And you see, again, Saul has completely lost. Now one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. Okay, and we're going to hear about Abiathar many times later. He's going to become actually one of the important figures and priests in King David's kingdom. So the sons of Ahimelech, one of the sons was Abiathar. He escaped from the slaughter. Okay, and he went and joined with David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the Lord's priests. So David said to Abiathar, I knew the day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, I have caused the death of all the persons of your father's house. So David is sorrowful because the fact that he was at Ahimelech and Doeg the Edomite was there caused Ahimelech to die. Of course, it wasn't David's fault, but at the same time, David did lie and mislead Ahimelech and tell him he was on the secret mission. So David felt sorrowful for this. Stay with me, do not fear, for he who seeks my life seeks your life, but with me you will be safe. So King David is offering protection to Abiathar. And now we see King David is now in this mode where he's on the run, and King Saul is still trying to kill him. But more and more we start to see resistance against Saul. See, the guards are not wanting to do what he's asking them to do. We see resistance to what he's doing. And eventually, King David is going to take the kingdom, but not yet. Glory be to God forever. Amen. Any questions? No questions?
I love your PowerPoint.
Sharif made it.
Really?
Mm.
Good job.
I wonder how God felt about David's lying, you know. And like, did he have to make confession or something?
You know, like the Bible is never tries to portray only the one side of people. It always just says it like it is. And whether the actions of some people be very honorable or good, or whether the actions be deceitful, or whether the actions be very, hard for us even to interpret. How is it that, how is it that we would see this? David is running for his life. He needs food. He's lying. How does God judge this? Another example that comes to my mind is the midwives of the Egyptians that were giving birth to, or helping the Hebrew women give birth at the time of Pharaoh in Egypt. And Pharaoh had commanded that all the Israelite babies be killed immediately after they were born. And these Hebrew midwives, they were lying. And after the babies were born, they would give birth, allow them to give birth, and then they would hide them. And so they lied. They lied. But in so lying, they were saving the lives of the children, and of something pleasing to God, that we don't kill these babies. So one thing about lying is that lying, the kind of lying that's definitely wrong, is the kind of lying that's related to my own selfish. I'm lying to have selfish gain. There's sometimes that we're not completely honest about things, not for selfish gain, but because we want to serve someone, or because we want to protect someone's feelings. For instance, if someone comes to me and says, not me personally, but to anyone, and let's say they did something, and what they did was like really, really poor, like they did a poor job at something, and they come and they ask us, it's like, well, what do you think? Do you think I did a good job? Well, what are you going to say? It's like, no, you did a horrible job, because that's really what I think. No, I mean, we spare their feelings, and we say, oh, no, you did good, and like, is that a lie?
I think it depends on who you're talking to. Like, if it's somebody could handle something like that, I have to tell them.
Yeah, well, maybe so. But the reason you can do that is because it's not going to hurt their feelings. So we're trying to spare their feelings, and maybe try to help them to improve some other way that's not as direct, or so on. The idea is that when we speak about lying, the intent is also important, right? It's not just because I want to avoid lying that I'm just going to be brutally honest with everyone, in which case I'm going to be offending a lot of people, perhaps. I'm not going to be helping someone by telling them the truth, not blatantly, directly. I'm going to help them in another way, just by telling them what they need to hear to help them to improve, perhaps. So if God were to come and to tell us exactly the truth about everything that we are, we would be devastated. Okay, so God Himself, He's not going to stand there and just tell us everything, because it's the most honest way. Okay, so it's just something for us to keep in mind. It's difficult for us to judge King David here. I think if any of us were in his position, we would have done the same. We would have tried to hide the fact that this was happening, because David was innocent. It wasn't like David was a fugitive rightfully because he really committed a crime and was trying to hide it. He was innocent in all of this. So God be the judge of this.
I feel like it also really shows like a real human element of even like saints, or they're not like perfect.
Exactly. And again, that's why the Bible is so wonderful, because it doesn't try to sugarcoat anything. We hear the best, like Noah, for instance, right? Noah, he's like the savior that is the most faithful person in the world, and builds the ark and saves the people and gets the animals and is so faithful and everything. And then we read about him after he gets drunk, okay, and he's naked. Okay, the same man. The Bible didn't say, what, we don't want to paint Noah in a negative light, so we're just going to avoid that story. We're just going to skip over it. No, we see him as a person, right? A person who is weak, and any one of us has our strengths and has our weaknesses and has our moments of weaknesses, where even if we do so many good things, like, we're not perfect and we fail, and that helps us to relate to the people we read about in the Bible, because they're real people. They're not just kind of fictional characters that, like, I always think of that story, like, if somebody wanted to make up the Bible, someone wanted to like invent the story, someone who was like wanted to say, oh, you know what, there's good guys and there's bad guys. Like no one would ever think that I'm going to take a character like Noah, who some people believe about his story was just fiction. It's like, yeah, all right, the flood and all that stuff, that could never happen, right? If somebody really wanted to make up such a story about this amazing Noah, like you would not put that detail in. You know, the fact that that detail is there tells us something about, okay, you know, like why is that there? Like that must have happened. You know, no one would have said that if it hadn't happened. So, okay. Anything else?